For the Sacramento Kings, this season is postseason or bust. And I think we all agree that the most likely route for the Sacramento Kings to actually make the playoffs is through the play-in. But the Western Conference never gets easier, even if two-thirds of the Western Conference actually makes it to postseason basketball. On today's Locked On Kings podcast, I'm going to be joined by John Karalis, host of the Locked On Celtics podcast, but also one of our national hosts for Locked On NBA. He and I are going to look in depth at the Western Conference, talk about which teams we expect to be in the cellar, which teams we expect to be competing with the Kings for play-in spots, which teams could make jumps, which teams could drop out, and which teams are going to be at the top of the West. So it's all on today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off season. If you're looking for in-depth analysis, game-by-game breakdowns, highlights, interviews with local and national experts, full coverage of your Sacramento Kings from January through December, this is the place for you, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And today's episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and let them know Locked On sent you. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I've been a Sacramento sports media member, Sacramento Kings media member for the last 7 years. This will be my 8th season covering the Kings, formerly for KHDK Radio here in Sacramento, now with ABC 10 Television. And today was day 3 of training camp for your Kings. And I think we're only 4 days away now from their first preseason game. And as we've talked about all offseason long, there are high expectations for the Kings this year. Maybe not as high as some teams in the West. We don't expect the Kings to really be a top 6 seed, although it would be fantastic for them to leapfrog the play-in altogether. But we do expect the Kings to end their playoff drought. And to me, ending the playoff drought means not only making the play-in, but coming out of the play-in and getting into the actual playoffs. I'm talking about competing in a best-of-7 series. Even if you're swept in 4 games in the opening round, does not matter. That's where the Kings have to make it to truly accomplish their goal and to end this playoff drought that is near historic. I don't know technically if making the play-in would end that drought or not. I certainly hope not. To me, that's not the ideal way the Kings want to end things, but it is a ideal addition to the league that, of course, the NBA implemented last season that gives the Kings a better route than what they had. Now, there is a good chance, too, that the Kings could actually end up as a 7th or 8th seed. That might be best case scenario for this team, and maybe it stings a little more as a 7th or 8th seed that the Kings have to win at least one game to actually make it into the postseason itself. But the route is there to give teams like the Sacramento Kings an opportunity, and we all expect the Kings to be in the mix. I have no time to lose today. My conversation with John Karalis is a great one. I think you're really going to enjoy it. We go through and pick apart this Western Conference, try and figure things out, analyze a bunch of different teams, and look at the best route for the Kings. We're going to talk about if the Kings had their pick of 1 or 2 opponents in a single game elimination play-in scenario, which teams the Kings would likely pick in the West that aren't like the Rockets or Oklahoma City Thunder in the cellar. So I want your interaction on that. You can reach out to me at any time during this interview or at just any time period on Twitter at MattGeorgeSac. That's SAC. You can email me MattGeorgeSports@gmail.com. Or if you're watching on YouTube, leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. But without any further ado, here's my conversation with Locked On Celtics host and Locked On NBA host, John Karalis. Before every single season, we look at the Western Conference and we talk about the level of competition. We talk about how tough it is to be a team like the Sacramento Kings in the Western Conference who's just trying to end a almost 16 season, or hopefully they're going to avoid a 16 season playoff drought. Except right now, in the second year of the NBA play-in, 2/3 of the freaking conference actually make it to postseason basketball. Now, I'm using air quotes for postseason because I personally don't count the play-in tournament as playoff basketball. So if the Kings, in my mind, were to make the play-in but not the actual playoffs, to me, the drought would continue. That's a conversation for another time. Right now, I'm joined by John Karalis. You might know him best as the host of the Locked On Celtics podcast, but John is also one of our Locked On NBA hosts because of his just national knowledge of the NBA in general. So, John, I'm going to ask you to leave your Boston Celtics expertise in the Eastern Conference for a second. Come over here to the West, take a look at this compilation of 15 teams, and help me figure out what the best route for the Kings is to making the postseason. I'll start with a very broad question. Is it even possible in your mind that the Kings not just make the play-in, but make the playoffs this season based off of what you know about this team?
Sure, it's possible. There's a good mix of guys. You've added pretty solid defender in Davion Mitchell. I think you got a decent mix here, and there's always a possibility of some kind of midseason move that the Kings are going to be at the center of a lot of trade deadline talk. So who knows how that's going to go? I think the Kings have the potential. Now, they're still the Kings. They're still coached by Luke Walton. There's still, there's still outside influences that make what we see on paper maybe a little less likely in some scenarios, could influence it in some scenarios, but I think the talent is there for the Kings to actually be okay.
The Sacramento Kings would love to avoid the play-in entirely if they could and make it into a top 6 seed, but that would require them jumping up 6 spots from where they were last season, John. So I think it's fair to assume that while that might be possible, and maybe that's the absolute best case scenario, is the Kings to be a 6 seed this season, that's likely not going to be the case. The Kings' route to the postseason is more than likely going to be securing a play-in spot, one of the 7 through 10 seeds. Hopefully it's 7 or 8, so the Kings at least get one postseason home game that we can celebrate inside the Golden One Center here in the California capital. That's likely the route for the Sacramento Kings to actually make it to the playoffs, and I'm talking about a best of 7 series. So we're going to look at the teams that were in the play-in last year and look at the competition that we expect around that play-in spot this year. But I want to start in the very depths of hell in the Western Conference. The teams at the very bottom who likely are going to be towards the top of draft lottery odds at the end of the season. And are we talking about just 2 teams here? Or are we maybe only talking about one, the Oklahoma City Thunder? Do you put the Houston Rockets down there with the expectation that John Wall's not going to be around too long? Is it 2 teams down there in your mind?
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be much with the Rockets. And I think the Rockets are going to do everything they can to stay down there as well. So Rockets and Thunder are definitely the 2 bottom dwellers. So we can chalk that up.
The 3 teams that didn't make the play-in last season, other than, of course, the Rockets and the Oklahoma City Thunder. 2 out of the 3 of them kind of surprised me, as I think it's fair to say they underachieved. And maybe you could say all 3, including the Sacramento Kings. But the Minnesota Timberwolves, there's just always question marks about that team. Now, they rarely were able to stay healthy. I think D'Angelo Russell and Anthony Edwards played only a handful of games together last season. If they can stay healthy, there's high expectations for them this year. And you talk about the New Orleans Pelicans, who are star driven. They get treated like they're a playoff team every year just because Zion is on their roster. And yet everybody outside of New Orleans is writing articles on how Zion is going to be leaving the New Orleans Pelicans at his first opportunity. But that's a team that really failed to do much of anything in my mind this offseason, which surprised me. Out of those 3 teams, the Kings included with those 2, if you were to label one as best odds to actually make the play-in this year, are the Kings that team, or is it another one?
Man, this is tough. This is tough because I think all 3 teams can stake a claim to that. And now the Kings certainly are in this mix, and that's I guess a compliment compared to years past. Like if you're, I'm not outwardly dismissing them. You look at Minnesota. Minnesota, I think, has the best potential because they have the best player in Karl Anthony Towns. So, and under Chris Finch, I think they have the potential to be a pretty good team. They're working on some things that, as you try to listen and take note of what teams are doing differently in the league. I think Minnesota under Finch, the defensive principles that he's trying to put in there, the way he's using Towns defensively to try to get something defensively out of him. If you can add that defensive element to the obvious offensive monster that he can be, now he can carry a team. So I have the highest feeling about the Minnesota Timberwolves. And then I kind of put Sacramento and New Orleans in that next tier. I'm not sure what Zion's going to be this year health-wise. That foot injury scares me. He's a big dude to have a foot injury, a fracture, and carry the weight that he does to consistently have those lower body injuries. That really freaks me out. And they've got a first-year coach in Willie Green. I don't know how that's going to go. You also have Luke Walton, so that's a demerit against the Kings. But I do think the Kings and the Pelicans, it's kind of a race to see who can figure things out first, because whoever figures things out first is going to have that advantage, and you can build on the momentum. I think I look at teams like the Kings and the Pelicans and even Minnesota as momentum type teams where once you start feeling good about things, you can really get on a roll. Once you start feeling bad about things, things can spiral. These teams are very susceptible to that kind of stuff. So I think it is a little bit of a race. Can the Kings integrate Davion Mitchell quickly? Can you get that Mitchell, Halliburton, Fox kind of combo working well right away? Can you beat the Pelicans to the punch there with their new system and what they're trying to do? And I think the first team that starts to figure it out and get a little bit of separation, no matter how early, will carry that advantage throughout the season.
In 2018, the fantasy sports experts at Sleeper realized that fantasy basketball was broken. Games were being won and lost based on whose players had more scheduled games that week. It made no sense. It required very little strategy. So in 2020, Sleeper released a brand new way of playing fantasy basketball. It's called Game Pick, and it's only available on Sleeper. In Game Pick, owners pick a single game per week for each starter to count towards their team's total score, ensuring an even number of games played between opponents. The days of losing because your opponent's players simply had more scheduled games to play in that week, those days are over, as are the days of mindless daily busy work and the days of giving up halfway through the season because of that busy work that you just don't want to do anymore. In Game Picks, you pick one game per week for each player based on player matchups, home versus away, opponent defensive ranking, pace of play, and more. Whether you prefer redraft, keeper, or dynasty leagues, Game Picks has you covered. Sleeper cracked the fantasy basketball code. If you play fantasy football and you prefer building a weekly strategy instead of busy daily work, you're going to love Game Picks. Download the Sleeper app and start a league with your friends today. You will not be disappointed. The Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by our friends over at Sweatblock, the antiperspirant wipes that work better than anything on the market. I say that because I use them. I especially use them when I go out golfing. And trust me, even with things starting to cool down as we move into fall here in California, that heat beats down on you on the golf course. And I've sweated through many a golf shirt and a hat before. Now, I actually haven't tried to use an antiperspirant wipe on my forehead. Maybe I should give that a shot to save my hats a little bit. But in terms of underarms and just body, using these Sweatblock antiperspirant wipes, they work so well for me. And the best part is a box lasts a long time because you can get 7 days of use out of one wipe. These are doctor created, doctor recommended. They give you a dry shirt guarantee, meaning if Sweatblock doesn't keep you dry, you get your money back. It's been a bestseller on Amazon for the past 10 years, has over 13,000 reviews, currently number one in Amazon's antiperspirant category. Manufactured in the USA, super easy to get to. Not only are they available on Amazon, like I mentioned, you can find them very easily at your local CVS pharmacy, but I recommend you buying them on sweatblock.com because if you use promo code locked on, you'll get 20% off of your order. So get yourself a box of Sweatblock antiperspirant wipes. Get rid of those sweat stains, that just general discomfort and embarrassment with Sweatblock. I'm going to step away from this the Western Conference conversation for just a second because you said something there. You've talked about Luke Walton as more of a hindrance than a help to the Sacramento Kings and their playoff chances in your mind. And I'm wondering if you could go into a little more detail on that, because I could argue that in his 2 seasons here in Sacramento, Walton has faced two very different seasons, the shortened season last year because of COVID and the season before where COVID just shut everything down. Now, of
Sure.
course, the Kings were unimpressive in the bubble as well. Luke Walton also has the second best winning percentage in Sacramento Kings history behind Rick Adelman, which is less about Walton and more of an insult, I think, to the Sacramento Kings.
I think
as a
that's
whole.
just, yes.
Right. So what is it about Luke Walton and his coaching style? Because there have been stretches where he's had the Kings playing really good basketball when, quite honestly, maybe they had no business. And I'm talking about right before the shutdown a couple seasons ago and right at the end of last season with Fox out, with Halliburton barely playing, with Rashawn Holmes out, Marvin Bagley out. And that team was still competing and playing better than they were before when they didn't have much of a bench. So I'm curious why, from your perspective, Luke Walton hinders this team.
Well, it's hard to say, and maybe it's a little unfair to put it all on Luke Walton because I don't know what kind of influences are coming from upstairs and maybe some of the things that he wants to do. You look at when he's been able to get them playing well, I think it's like post-trade deadline, right? Like you're talking about times where the outside distractions are gone. But I think some of how he's used players has been a little bit of a question, right? Some of the rotation stuff has been interesting. And again, how much of that comes from upstairs and how much of it is Luke's fault? Luke Walton, coaches bear the brunt of that kind of decision-making. With the Kings, with a lot of teams that are in the Kings position, there are edicts that come from upstairs. You got to play this guy. We got to get this guy some minutes. You got to make sure that you're doing X, Y, and Z. And maybe once those things are kind of off the table, he can kind of do more of what he wants and he can get guys to buy in a little bit. So when I say Luke Walton is a hindrance, is that I'm not 100% sure that he's going to be able to find the right combinations right away. And he's going to be playing guys maybe out of position or experimenting a little bit too much. It's more about the choices that he's making with the personnel and how he uses these guys with the youth there. And, you have things like, but the Buddy Hield drama, you have things, other things that come into play. Hard for me to say exactly if it's all on him. So I will admit that maybe there's a little bit that's being unfair, but I do need to see him kind of properly use his roster.
Well, there are a lot of people, myself included, over the last couple seasons who have looked at rotations with a critical eye. And I actually talked about this to open up my podcast yesterday because I said the Kings finally have a good problem in the sense that they probably have the most depth that they've had at any point Luke Walton has been here in Sacramento. Certainly way more depth than what they started the season with last year. The problem is, as good as it is to have a lot of players who can play, you still have to find a way to play them. And more importantly, you have to find the right combinations of those players, not just to work together, but to actually win basketball games. And that's going to be one of the biggest challenges that's going to be under a microscope for Luke Walton from opening day of this season. If the Kings want any chance to make the playoffs, Luke Walton has to get his rotations right. So a lot of those questions that you posed hopefully will be answered pretty quickly. But let's transition back now to the Western Conference picture. We've talked about the 5 teams that were outside of the play-in. Now let's talk about the 4 teams that were in the play-in last season. That's the Los Angeles Lakers, Memphis Grizzlies, Golden State Warriors, and San Antonio Spurs, who just barely beat out the Pelicans and the Kings to get that spot. Of course, they lost in the opening round to the Memphis Grizzlies in the play-in. So out of those 4 teams, I'm curious which ones you think are likely to stay in that picture, which ones are likely to move up, which ones could potentially fall out. I think it's safe to say the Lakers move out of that, assuming that old team is able to stay healthy during the regular season. But the Golden State Warriors are extremely reliant on Steph Curry being Steph, Klay Thompson coming back and being even half of himself, not to mention the lot of young players on that team. They don't even know if they're going to have Andrew Wiggins available for every single home game this season. The San Antonio Spurs, they've gotten worse, right? But Greg Popovich still coaches that team. So out of that, and then the Memphis Grizzlies, they're young, but they're exciting. Many believe that they've leapfrogged the Kings, and rightfully so, and their rebuild with the young, exciting John Morant. Where do you look at those 4 teams and which are moving up, staying the same, and maybe moving down?
Yeah, I mean, I think 3 of those teams have the potential to move up. And then the thing with the West is that 2 games either way could drop someone from the 4th seed to the 7th seed. But I think the Lakers, the Warriors, and the Grizzlies are good bets to push up into the top 6.
Mm.
I'm banking on some improvement from Memphis. I think that they are adding some shooting and hopefully I don't know what the addition of Steven Adams is gonna do for them, but I think that toughness will help them. But it's a big loss losing Valanciunas. That's a big loss for them. So they're the team that I'm not quite as high on getting out of that play-in tournament, but I believe in Ja. I think he's a really good player. So I think that he has the ability to carry them maybe to the 6th seed, potentially. The Lakers are such a fascinating case.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that they'll I think they'll be above that play-in tournament, but I don't think they're going to be that much above the play-in tournament. I really have serious questions about the Lakers, maybe more serious questions than most, because I think the Lakers are at the top of the championship odds right now. But that mix, the Russell Westbrook fit with those guys, I just don't know that it's going to work right away. And I think with the Lakers, they're also, because of their age, I don't think they're going to go on a big regular season sprint to worry about seeding. So the Lakers still have a potential to drop a little further than some people expect, just because they're going to save their energy for the late run. What I think is the Lakers are going to be kind of on the cusp of the play-in tournament. And then in the last month of the season, they're going to start ramping it up and they're going to push into like 6, 5, maybe 4. Golden State, I'm a little higher on. I think that the full season with Steph and Clay coming back whenever he's going to come back, maybe January, February, I think that's going to be a push, enough of a push to get them out of the play-in tournament. So, and San Antonio, I do think San Antonio is going to drop out. I think San Antonio is the one team that I think they're going to miss the whole thing altogether. This is where you're right. Pop could push them because Pop gets these guys to overachieve, but I think they're in such a transition period right now. I think the people in San Antonio, I think the fans want them to just, hey, look, let's just do this. Let's just drop out. Let's get the good draft pick. Let's keep pushing for the rebuild. So I think San Antonio is going to go that route. So one team drops out. I think all 4 of the play-in teams from last season are out of the play-in for one reason or another.
It's funny, if there's one team that you talked about that the 3 in New Orleans, Sacramento, and Minnesota are looking at and licking their lips and trying to pick off, it is that San Antonio Spurs team who they think, okay, that's one slot, at least in the play-in, that more than likely is going to come available. And then potentially it's a 3-year or maybe even 4-team race to steal that spot. But for both the Los Angeles Lakers and Golden State Warriors, I mean, to me, the play-in last season was a complete success. We saw, or we at least heard LeBron James complaining about it. The Lakers weren't too happy to have to play. And you've brought up their age. The Lakers don't strike me as a team who's going to care too much about home court advantage in an actual playoff series. They believe that they have the talent to win on the road or at home. It does not matter. But I do imagine that a team as old as the Lakers, who has dealt with injury issues to some of their key pieces, they're going to want to avoid having to play an extra game or 2. And that might lead to some, maybe like you talked about, late desperation towards the end of the season to fight their way out of that spot. Do you look at it the same way with the Golden State Warriors too, who are a little bit younger with some of the players that they have on their roster, but their old guys and Steph and Clay have injury history?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's going to be quite as pronounced as the Lakers. I think that the Warriors will gladly sacrifice regular season games for health, but I think the Warriors might value the home court a little bit more than some of these other teams, just because they have such a rabid fan base and they have that big new arena that has been around for a couple of years and has been empty for a while. I wouldn't be surprised if the owners have been like, hey, look, Steve, can we get a few more home games here in the playoffs to make up some of the money that we lost? So I do think the Warriors will put a little added emphasis on home court for as much as they can. So I think the Lakers absolutely have to focus completely on the playoffs. So, and you're right. They just do not care. They do not care where they fall. They just want to make sure their number one priority is absolute health. I think the Warriors do care a little bit more about where they fall.
Today's Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Rock Auto. The days of going to your local auto part chain store and dealing with intimidating questioning, especially when you're someone like me who knows absolutely nothing about cars, only to inevitably be priced into the one part that your store happens to carry, those days are over. You can save money, you can save time, and you can save pulling hair out by using rockauto.com anytime you need anything for your car. Save up to 30, 50, or even 100% with Rock Auto compared to your local chain stores. Save that time, save that money. A good example is like a Honda Odyssey fuel pump is $353 on average from a chain store. It's $216 on average from Rock Auto. Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Rock Auto's prices are reliably low for every customer. They have everything you can need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto parts need. Go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or your truck. Right, Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box? So they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. And Locked On Kings is brought to you by betonline.ag. BetOnline is back. It's better than ever, especially for football. All eyes are on the gridiron as teams are back for another NFL and NCAA season. As always, BetOnline is your number one spot for all the pro and college football action this season. With a new updated site and interface, even more odds, props, and contests, BetOnline continues to be the number one source for everything football and, of course, everything basketball. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today to receive a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. And don't forget to use our promo code LOCKEDON to receive that bonus. From football to basketball, boxing, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season at BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. You said that you could see 3 out of the 4 of the play-in teams actually moving up and moving into maybe a top 6 seed. If that's going to happen, then 3 teams that were top 6 last season have to fall out. We're talking about the Jazz, Suns, Nuggets, Clippers, Mavericks, and Trailblazers. Those were the top 6 in that order last season. Out of those 6 teams, which 3 do you feel are more than likely to drop into the play-in picture or maybe even plummet past the play-in picture? Is the most obvious one the LA Clippers, just because Kawhi Leonard might not be playing for the majority of the season?
The Clippers is such an interesting case because Paul George on his own without Kawhi steps up. He's better in a lot of ways without the second star there. If he's the main guy, he can actually end up carrying that team a little bit. I think Portland is a team that could slide a bit. Again, new coach, maybe trying some new things. Who knows what happens with Dame? That's a team that I'm looking to see drop. Dallas is a team that could fall to 7. Obviously, they have Luka, who I love, but I don't know how they're going to figure out the Porzingis fit. And I'm just not a Jason Kidd guy. I don't think many of us are. That's going to be an interesting dynamic with Dallas. So that's 2. Of the rest, this is going to be an interesting thing to see where these guys go. It could be the Clippers. This is a big toss up for me. At this point, you can kind of pick one.
I personally
this is a tough one. I really have a tough one right here.
I wouldn't be surprised at all, John, if we're looking at like the top teams, and we're going to talk about the top teams in a minute. Top 3 or top 4 are in a league of their own. And then 5 through 10 is just a complete cluster, right. What.
So here's the thing. Phoenix is super interesting, right? They are a Chris Paul injury away from falling into the play-in. And I don't know how he keeps doing it. I think we saw it in the end, in the finals, like he just, but through the playoffs, he kept battling injury after injury after injury. I just don't know how much longer this Blues mobile can keep going with him before it falls apart, right?
So you're just to clarify, you're not a believer yet in Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton's ability to step up and take over this team for a long period of time should Chris Paul go down. We saw him do it short term in the playoffs,
right.
and full credit to them, but we're talking about if he were to miss months upon months in the regular season.
Yeah, I do question that. I think so many things went right for Phoenix last year that we like. Yes, I don't want to make it seem like I'm disrespecting the Suns. They're a good team, and again, a good team is going to end up finishing 7th in the West. That's just finishing 7th in the West. The East is a lot better, but the 7th seed in the West is still going to be better than the 7th seed in the East. I do think a good team is going to fall that far, and we could be looking at a situation where the 3rd seed and the 7th seed are separated by only a few games, and there's a lot of movement. Like you said, that 5 through 10 is just going to be a real logjam. I think Phoenix, Booker, sure, and Ayton has stepped up. I want to see Ayton do it for a full season, another full season, but it's even more the supporting cast. I think they got so much from that supporting cast last year that was a bunch of guys that you're like, wow, I can't believe he's doing this, and he's doing this, and he's doing. It's not even that I don't believe in Booker and Ayton, although I do want to see more Ayton than anything prove it. I kind of want to see that supporting cast do that again before I fully believe in the Suns staying at the top of the standings.
So does that mean you have Utah and Denver in whatever order as your top two, absolutely at the top of that mountain? And then
I think Utah is just built for the regular season. Utah is going to run away with this. I think Utah could end up with the 2nd best record in the league behind Brooklyn. I think regular season Utah Jazz is going to be great. And that's going to be an accomplishment. When you sign Hassan Whiteside, you shouldn't, no matter what capacity that he plays, you shouldn't have the 2nd best record in the league. But I do believe that the Utah Jazz is going to run it back and have that. Now, what they do in the playoffs, I don't know. But I think regular season Utah is going to be great. Denver, so much hinges on Jamal Murray, and I don't know what's going to happen. Like, they just gave Michael Porter Jr. all this money. But, his whole craziness with the vaccine stuff, I don't know what kind of distraction that's going to be. I think he's kind of an oddball anyway, but he's good if he can stay healthy and if they can get him to play any level of defense. I think Aaron Gordon, the full kind of full training camp with these guys, he's going to be a big factor for them. So as they wait for Jamal coming in, and obviously Jokic, is going to be the MVP level Jokic. I think him skipping the Olympics to focus on himself, his body, is really telling of where his head's at, because these guys in international basketball never do that. And that's a huge deal. So I do put Denver up at the top. And look, some of these teams that I've been talking about that could fall down to 7 very easily could jump up to 3 or 4.
John, just so you know, that's 2-time Sacramento King Hassan Whiteside that you're talking about.
Oh, so I know.
A little bit of respect for that. Okay. The team who drafted him, who has not been to the playoffs in 15 seasons. Yeah. We'll take the respect where we can get it, right? No Eric Spoelstra to get the best out of Hassan Whiteside in Sacramento. But I guess we'll wrap up with this, John. Let's assume that OKC, Houston, and I feel bad saying this, but just for the sake of the conversation, San Antonio, they're out of it. They're just those are the bottom 3 teams that don't make the play-in. Out of the Timberwolves, Pelicans, Warriors, Grizzlies, Lakers, Blazers, Mavericks, and Clippers, maybe even the Suns as well, but I'm going to keep them out of it. But out of all those teams that I just listed, who do you think Sacramento would fare the best in a single game elimination type game, whether it's home or on the road? Last season, the Kings had a lot of success for no reason against the Dallas Mavericks. So maybe they're able to do that again. That was a good matchup for them, even with the Luka Doncic horror. But out of all those teams, if you said, okay, the Kings have to win, maybe even let's say the Kings are the 9th or 10th seed. The Kings have to beat 2 of those teams to actually make the playoffs. Who are those 2?
I'm going to say New Orleans. I think you can stop New Orleans. I think, and I'm putting a lot of value in Mitchell here.
Yes.
I'm putting a lot of value in Mitchell.
We all are.
Obviously, now coming back from putting my Celtics face back on, I just saw him completely lock down Peyton Pritchard in summer league and make that his job. Like, he was like, okay. So off night was in full effect here for my Celtics in the playoffs, in the summer league. I highly value his defensive ability. And so I think he's going to be, I know it's a rookie, but I think he's going to be valuable. Defense is effort, and I think he's going to be able to put that in. So, okay, New Orleans is one.
I really think it's Dallas just because of one, history, and two, lack of depth. Because depth tends to kill the Kings. Like, if I'm Sacramento, I'm not as afraid of Luka Doncic and maybe Kristaps Porzingis torturing me as I am like Paul George with the Clippers or Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum with the Blazers.
I'm just going with teams I don't trust. I trust Luka to make that happen. I trust Luka to step up in that situation. Obviously, you have your history with the Mavericks, but I think the Timberwolves might be the other choice. You're not going to stop Karl Anthony Towns, but they're not going to stop you at this point until they prove that they can stop somebody else. That's going to be my guess. I think you're just going to get to the rim with reckless abandon against Minnesota, and I think that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to go with the two teams I just trust the least, is Minnesota and New Orleans.
This might piss off the wonderful city of Memphis and its fans, but I actually think the Kings, if they got a one-off shot at John Morant and the Memphis Grizzlies, I think the Kings would actually take that game, just based off of historically how well De'Aaron Fox has played against John Morant. Record-wise, I think the Kings are 3-2 in the 5 meetings between those two teams when Fox and Morant both played. But Fox, compared to Morant and the success that Fox has had, I think is a big difference there. So I like the Kings' chances. I wouldn't say it's a shoo-in or anything like that. I'd give them a better chance against a team like New Orleans, like you talked about, or maybe even Minnesota. But I like their opportunities against Memphis if they got that shot.
It's just so nuts right now because we're 3 practices into the season, and it's we don't know. Every year there's somebody, there's one team that is full of guys dancing on the sidelines. And who is that team? It could be Sacramento. They've been that team before. They could find it again. I do think that the Kings, like I said at the beginning, are primed for a midseason move. I think that you could be looking at a Buddy Hield, Harrison Barnes, both of those guys moving out, maybe getting somebody big back in. It could change the entire dynamic of this team and change its identity. So who knows what's going to happen during the season? I think if we have this conversation again in January during the doldrums, we could be looking at a lot of different situations. And you know how it goes, man. Somebody's going to get hurt. One of these guys, it could, you brought up Dallas, like it could be Dallas because they are a little bit of a mess. That's going to be a really fascinating team, an under the radar fascinating team. So many of the teams are rising up to that. Ooh, what about, what's going to happen with Brooklyn and Kyrie with all his vaccination stuff? And, everybody's looking at the Lakers and all of that. But the Mavericks are a real wild card here. Luka is so good, but their fit on that team is so all over the place. They could be the team that gets bounced. And what happens in the NBA if Luka goes out in the play-in tournament? Like, what? That can't happen for them. That's going to be a real disaster if that happens.
All right, John, before I let you go, let's go over to the Eastern Conference really quick, because you said 2 things earlier. One, you said you think the Brooklyn Nets are going to have the best regular season record in the NBA. That is a team that's built to make or win the championship. And if they don't, it's a colossal failure, which I readily admit I am actively rooting for that team to fail. Number 1. And number 2 is you said the Eastern Conference talent has gotten better. Now you said the 7th seed in the West is still better than the East, which I agree with, but the gap is significantly smaller. The East has gotten significantly better. So of course, with your expectation for the Boston Celtics, just what's happening to the Philadelphia 76ers right now, how big of a jump the Atlanta Hawks made last season. Yeah. How do you expect, just in one broad answer, the Eastern Conference to shake up both in the play-in and at the top?
Yeah, the East is going to be, wild to watch. I mean, obviously the cream of the crop there, Brooklyn and Milwaukee. I think Brooklyn, obviously talent-wise, even with Kyrie, without Kyrie, they're going to be really, really good. Milwaukee has that. I wonder what the championship hangover is going to be for Milwaukee, but also I think having won the championship is like, I don't know, that first time down the ski mountain when you get to the bottom and you're like, oh my God, I made it and I didn't die. So the next time down the hill, you're like, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. You do like, I think Milwaukee has that confidence of like, wow, we kind of really tried to lose a couple of these series and we still managed to win. I think maybe they come in with a little bit extra. So the top of the East is really, really good. The rest of the East has such wild cards. Philly, Joel Embiid just cannot stop pouring kerosene onto this dumpster fire that is the Ben Simmons situation. So who knows what's going to happen there. Atlanta, I have questions about how much they may have overachieved. And how much are these new points of emphasis officiating going to impact Trae Young? I think that's something to watch. So Atlanta's fascinating. Chicago is fascinating, adding all of that talent, but how does that fit? Boston is in the mix. Miami with Kyle Lowry. Like, there are a lot of teams there with ceiling. The variance in the East is kind of wild for different reasons than the variance in the West. The West is a lot of teams are good, and so the variance is going to be you win 2-3 games, you lose 2-3 games. I think like with the Celtics, the variance is high third seed, low play-in tournament, and that's based on what's happening within the team dynamic. Can certain things happen? That's true of Miami. That's true of New York. That's true of a few other teams to varying degrees. So I do think it's going to be a pretty great competition in the East. I think once you get past the top two, a lot of different things. I can see 3 or 4 teams that are competing for that third seed, that fourth seed. And then beyond that, it's going to be a real rock fight for 5, 6, 7 into the play-in tournament.
For national coverage of the NBA like this every single week, make sure you check out John Karalis on the Locked On NBA podcast. Make that your second listen every single day after or Locked On Kings being your first listen. And maybe even check out the Locked On Celtics podcast, aka the second place team in the summer league that the Sacramento Kings defeated, which we all know matters more than the regular season. It's the better trophy.
I'm still sore about that.
It's the better trophy. We'll always have that. If nothing else, the Kings and give Peyton Pritchard nightmares and have a summer league trophy for the second time. The first team to do it 2 times. Hey, there's history that the Kings can actually rally behind. But John, thank you so much for coming here on Locked On Kings, my friend. It's always a pleasure. And we might, like you said, have to revisit this conversation in January to see how different it is compared to right now. Because one thing I don't expect the Kings to make the playoffs. I don't even expect the Kings to make the play-in, but I expect the Kings to absolutely be in the conversation until the bitter end of next season. So we'll see how everything plays out. We'll talk about it again soon, my friend. Thank you so much for coming on, and I look forward to chatting with you again soon.
You got it. Whenever you need me, I'm here.
It was a pleasure having John on as always. We honestly are going to have to revisit this conversation and take a look at the Western Conference once we get to late December, early January, when things start to shake up a little bit more. But as of right now, looking at a crystal ball, I pretty much agree with almost everything that he said. How do you feel about our conversation? Let me know at MattGeorgeSack on Twitter. You can email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. I really want to hear, out of all the teams in the Western Conference that aren't the Houston Rockets and Oklahoma City Thunder, and I guess I'll include the San Antonio Spurs in there, which 2 teams, if the Kings had to face 2 different teams in a play-in scenario, which 2 teams do you think the Kings match up best against, or are you most confident that the Kings would defeat at least one of them to actually make it into the playoffs? Let me know that. Let me know if you think the Kings have a chance, honestly, at being a top 6 seed. That might be the absolute best case scenario that we're talking about, that team jumping up 6 spots, which is just crazy to think about. So maybe it's possible, maybe it's not. You let me know. And of course, if you will join me for the next Locked On Kings podcast, I really would appreciate that. Thank you so much for the support recently. We're so close to actual Kings basketball. Even if it's preseason, it's still basketball. It's exciting. Check out all the great videos from Sean Cunningham from ABC 10 or James Ham from NBC Sports. They've been posting excellent videos from inside the practice facility after each day of training camp. Go and check those out. You can find those on Twitter, and I retweet a lot of them too. So you'll find it on my account as well. Go check those out because some fun videos and behind the scenes looks of the practice facility. I'm going to have to get one of them in just to talk about what they've seen in training camp so far. So look forward to that. Until next time, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.